prayer can feel empty, even when you haven't stopped praying. The struggle is confusing because you still believe in God, but something feels disconnected. And sometimes the hardest part is not that you've stopped praying, but the hardest part is you're still praying, but you don't even know what you're saying. Now, if you've ever been in that position, or if you're going through it right now, but you haven't quite gotten the answers that you're looking for, then stick around and let's discuss this together. Now, imagine you sit down, maybe in the morning, maybe late at night after the day is finally done, and you try to speak to God, but the words feel empty. Sometimes the words sound too familiar and repeated, like something you've rehearsed over and over again, and you're just regurgitating words to God. You say what you know to say, but somewhere inside, it feels like you're talking to God from a distance. And you'll agree with me, that can be very confusing. Now, there are moments when you remember what solid prayer used to feel like. There was attention, there was honesty. Most times, there was even peace, deep down. But now your mind just wanders after a few seconds. Your thoughts just naturally drift to bills and work and family and regrets and unfinished conversations. Things you should have done differently just come up while you're trying to communicate with God. Now, sometimes you don't even know what to say anymore. So you just keep it short. You say prayers that it's like you just want to get it out of the way. It's now routine. Or sometimes you even avoid it altogether. And then quietly, another thought starts to form. You start to ask yourself, what happened to me? Now, a lot of people carry that question privately. They assume something must be wrong with them, that God feels distant because they failed somewhere. But often the truth is more human than that. Often the truth comes when you search yourself deeply. You see, sometimes prayer feels empty because we've been bringing words to God instead of bringing ourselves. I'll say that again. Sometimes prayer feels empty because we've been bringing words to God without bringing ourselves. And it doesn't work that way with God. It never has. And I don't think it ever will. Before we go further, if these kinds of conversations help you slow down and think clearly and draw closer to God in an honest way, then please subscribe to this video and share it with someone who may need it too. That way we can keep building a quiet place for real faith together. Now, the reason today's topic matters is simple. God has never wanted polished language. He has always wanted truth in the inward parts. In Psalm 62, David says to pour out your hearts before God. He didn't say you should perform. He didn't say you should impress. But he said, pour out your hearts before God. But you see, nowadays, a lot of us learn to say prayerful things before we learn how to be honest in prayer. We know how to thank God. We know how to ask for protection. We know how to mention our plans, but we often don't bring the deeper things. the disappointment, the mental exhaustion, the resentments that we feel, the fear that we haven't named, the sadness that we keep managing and keep suppressing, the questions we feel slightly ashamed to admit. And so we hardly mention them. And when the real self stays outside prayer, at that point, prayer begins to feel strangely holy. Now, I remember hearing someone describe it this way. He said for months, he prayed every day, but every prayer just felt dry. And so one evening, he sat down and instead of saying the usual words, he simply said, God, I don't even know what's going on in me right now. I feel tired, I feel distracted, and I don't know how to come to you. And that was it. No polished language, no spiritual performance. And strangely, that was the first honest prayer he had prayed in a very long time. Sometimes what feels like weak prayer is actually the beginning of real prayer. Jesus gives a quiet picture I think it's in Matthew 6, where he warns against empty repetition. Now, Jesus gave that warning not because repeated prayers are wrong, but because words can keep moving while the heart stays absent. And in that passage, he reminds us that the Father already knows what we need. Once you realize that, it just changes the entire atmosphere. You see, prayer is not informing God. No, God knows everything. But what prayer does, prayer is opening yourself to God. Prayer is coming honestly to God. And sometimes emptiness in prayer is not a sign that God has left. No. Sometimes it's an invitation to slow down enough so you can become honest again. You can become honest with your feelings. You can become honest in your communication to God, which essentially is what prayer is. Now, that may mean sitting in silence for a minute before you speak. In the world, they call it meditation. But you sit in silence, you think, and then you communicate with God. It may mean telling God exactly what is true about your current situation. How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you feel numb? Do you feel angry? Do you feel uncertain? I mean, the world today is filled with a lot of uncertainties. Do you feel that way? Tell him. Or you can even tell him, I don't know what I need. Just be honest. He's your father. You see, that kind of honesty is not disrespect because a lot of people fear that. They feel, how can I tell God exactly how I feel? How can I tell him the carnal thoughts going through my head? How can I open up about the anger and resentment I feel? Whereas I'm a chorister or I'm a minister of the gospel. They feel it's disrespectful to come to God with such thoughts and such communication. But that's not disrespect. That's relationship. That's true, genuine relationship. And that's what God wants. There's another part I think we should talk about, quite frankly. You see, sometimes prayer feels empty because our inner life has become crowded. Constant noise, endless scrolling on social media, rushing from one thing to another, tight schedules. And after a while doing all of this, the soul loses attentiveness to the things of the spirit. And mind you, this is not rebellion. It's just saturation with the things of the world. And when that happens, prayer can feel distant, not because God moved away, but because we have been carrying too much noise inside us to notice that still small voice of God. And that's why sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to become quiet enough to notice what is happening in your own heart when it comes to your relationship with God. You do not need a perfect prayer life to come to God. No, you do not need to feel deeply emotional. No. And also, you do not even need the right words. The only thing you need when communicating with God so that you do not feel empty, you need honesty. You need to come honestly to God. And if your prayer life feels empty right now, I don't think that's the end. No. Maybe it's the beginning. Maybe it's where God is gently leading you away from performance and into his presence in sincerity. So tonight or tomorrow morning, when you kneel to pray, don't try to sound spiritual. Just kneel or sit down if you want and be still for a moment and then tell God the truth as it rings in your heart. Tell him, no matter how gory it is, no matter how outrageous it is, tell him. And that often is where real prayer begins again. God is closer than you think. He is.